foam up the slide and it came into the galley floor. We wanted to start to evacuate the passengers, but there's a bit of a bottleneck and nobody was coming forward. The aisle is quite narrow where the galley is, and they were sort of, and then they were pushing forward, and I could see this boy that was really sort of pushed against the wall. He couldn't get out, so I pulled him by his t-shirt, had the yellow t-shirt on, and he sort of tumbled forward, and after that everybody sort of just tumbled in behind him. And we just directed them down the slide.
Jump! Jump! Jump!
In training they tell you to, bring people to the door and you tell them to jump.
Desperate to get people off the plane quickly, the purser returns to the jammed door. After several attempts, he manages to force it open.
The only time I turned around was to make sure that Charlie was following me.
See you up there.
One thing I did see when I looked back was people going to the front, towards the front of the plane where the seats are, and pushing the seats forward, folding them down as they went along. So people were trying to rush forward from the back. The chute was open and people were just jumping up straight onto the chute. As I got to the bottom, I didn't look back at all, was just wanting to get off.
Dozens of passengers have made it off the plane, but there are still many more inside.
But it was smouldering and it was black, thick black smoke. And Charlie had said that after you'd gone, this black smoke came down, he said, and everybody was screaming and panicking. He said people are going to die in there.
Standby power switch.
Captain Peter Terrington and his first officer Brian Love are still aboard the burning airplane, and they still haven't completed the steps required to evacuate.
There was 4 tons of fuel coming out of that aircraft wing tank.
Okay, go, Brian. Go, Brian.
I could see quite a lot of flames.
Completing the checklist would put their lives at risk.
We did as many items as we could, and then we both went out of the flight deck window.
There are no more passengers at the exits, so Joanna Toff decides to see if anyone else is left in the cabin.
And the smoke was you could touch it. It was so thick, and you could take it was awful, really.
Go!
There was a young girl just a bit further down in the cabin, but she was really disorientated. I mean, I suppose we all were, really. We just didn't have any idea what was going on. I just brought her down to the slide. She was taken off then. The fireman was telling me to come, and I was thinking, well, I've not finished, we've not finished yet.
When Toff re-enters the cabin, the thick smoke makes it as hard to see as it is to breathe.
It was really dark and quiet. I'd never seen anything like it. And I could see the light from the door anyway by then, so I knew where the door was.
The smoke forces Toff to abandon her search. Just minutes after pulling off the runway, British Air Tours Flight 28 has been consumed by fire.
We got out of a flight deck which was relatively intact, and when we turned round on the ground, we saw a complete wreck of an aircraft, and it had happened in a matter of seconds. It was dreadful.
54 people are dead. Another would die in hospital.
There was nothing wrong really with us. We thought nothing physical wrong with us, but our lives changed, you know, just in those few hours.
I couldn't breathe. I was virtually out the door and I couldn't breathe then.
The smoke was coming in and everybody just stood up and ran out. It was just a mad panic getting out.
Because when the smoke came, you just couldn't see anything at all. Couldn't see anybody.
It takes 125 firefighters more than 2 hours to put out the fire. News of the disaster soon spreads around the world. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher flies to Manchester to visit the scene.
When we get a terrible air crash of this kind, everyone is appalled and shocked. Every single aspect of this accident will be thoroughly investigated. It has to be.
This is the 4th major commercial air disaster of the year. In June of 1985, an Air India jet exploded over the Atlantic Ocean. 329 people were killed. Weeks later, 137 people died when a Delta Airlines flight crashed at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. And just 10 days before the Manchester crash, the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a fully loaded 747, slammed into a mountain, killing 520 people. British Air Tours Flight 28 adds 55 new victims to the list of casualties. 1985 is now the deadliest year in the history of commercial aviation. The flying public is getting nervous. Britain's Air Accidents Investigation Branch sends a team to Manchester to unravel the events that led to the catastrophe. Among them, Stephen Moss. He'll be inspecting the plane's engines.
This should not really have happened. The aircraft didn't even get airborne. It didn't run off the runway, and yet still 55 people were killed.
Chris Prothero is also on the team. His focus is on the fire.
We were aware from initial reports that the fire had entered the aircraft very rapidly as the aircraft came to a halt, and that was a focus for me.
It doesn't take too long for Stephen Moss to figure out where the trouble started. He sees damage to the plane that was not caused by fire.
Well, the first thing we noticed clearly was the hole in the underside of the wing. And right next to it was a gaping hole in the side of the engine. Seems that one had led to the other.
To get a plane loaded with passengers off the ground, you need to generate massive thrust. That power is created when air travels through the front of the engine to a series of compressor fans. It's then ignited, and the exhaust pushes the plane forward. Something had clearly gone very wrong with Flight 28's left engine. Investigators look for clues on the runway and in the cabin, hoping to discover why so many people died.
Entering the cabin for the first time, there was as with all aircraft fires, there's an overwhelming and pungent smell. Burning plastic, burnt fuel, burning material had dropped down onto seats, and so the aisles were filled up with the remains of overhead lockers. A scene of devastation.
The damage in the cabin is revealing. It's almost completely charred up high, but is relatively intact down low.
It was clear that there had not been flashover in this particular case.
A flashover occurs when the gases in an enclosed space become